All right, so looks like we're rolling. So thank you guys for sticking by as we were getting set. You guys got a little preview of what we do. So that's not what we do. What we are here for is trying to figure out how do we use Alexa skills to build a Kubernetes cluster. So if you've ever seen any keynote presentation, people always say, hey, I'm going to show you how to build a Kubernetes cluster, but I'm going to do it with a voice skill, right? So how do they actually do it? So little introduction about myself. My name is Prabhu Bharati. I'm a public cloud specialist with the VMware Cloud Services, hashtag VCS, number 2. For someone keeping count on this side, these guys don't count. If they heckle me, they're part of my team, so that's all good. So anyway, quick question. How many of you have used an Alexa at home? Good. How many of you actually built an Alexa skill from scratch? Nice. I see 4 hands. That's cool. That's very cool. So anyway, what we'll do is we'll kind of walk through how do we actually get started. So the guys who are in the front who said you've already used the skill, this may be a little bit of a repetition, so just stay with me for the time being. So just quickly, the basics of an Alexa interaction model, right? So how does everything come together for an Alexa skill? And this is just in general. I'm going to kind of breeze through this really fast, but if you're interested, there's 100 sessions that are being run for Alexa, so bear with me if I'm going really fast, right? The skill itself requires a couple different components. So you have the Amazon Alexa, the device itself, right? So that's your Echo Dot or the Echo device that you have. That connects to the voice service itself, right? So the voice service is hosted through Amazon, and where you go and build everything is on the developer portal, right? So that's where you're going to go in and start building all your interaction models and so on and so forth. Now, Amazon does a great job of actually giving you what they call a skills kit. A skills kit is basically an out-of-the-box kind of wizard-like thing that you can use to build all these skills as you want it to do. Now, the second part of the skills is your Lambda function, right? Everyone familiar with Lambda function? Guessing? Yes. Okay, super. So Lambda is what is actually going to go and execute whatever you're going to go and say, right? So that's the basis of how this is kind of set up. Now, let's layer on a couple more things. If you want to use any of this, what I'm going to show you in this presentation, I will make the source code available to you guys, so you can actually use this. Full disclosure, I have actually taken a lot of pieces from other places, so Stack Overflow being my best friend for the past month or so. A couple things that you will need in order for you to try this. So number one is the AWS developer account, right? That's number one that you need. You do need an AWS account. I haven't fully calculated how much this costs to run, but I don't anticipate this going over a couple dollars every couple times you run it. In our case, what I'm going to show you here, I'm going to leverage the VMware Cloud PKS Kubernetes engine as my Kubernetes endpoint here. Having said that, you can obviously translate this to any Kubernetes service that is out there, leveraging the APIs that are out there, right? If you wish to try it on the VMware Cloud PKS platform, there is a $150 credit that is available right now. So please use that. If you've not got a card, please see one of us. We'll get you a card so that you can redeem it. Some familiarity with Node.js would be good for what I'm going to show you. If you don't, that's fine. I'll kind of walk you through what that kind of looks like. Just the basic understanding of API interactions, like how do you do get calls and put calls and stuff like that, I think will be helpful to parse through the code, and also just Kubernetes basics, right? So I'm not covering that in this presentation per se, but if you know a little bit of that, I think it'll help you out, obviously. And please feel free to use, improve, let me know what I can do better on this, and I want you guys to use this ultimately, right? So if you now need to get to building this thing, right, there are a couple key basics that you need to remember. So number one is the invocation name itself. So what do I mean by invocation name, right? Invocation name is something that you use to start a skill. So when you open up CNN, you say, Alexa, open up CNN, right? So that means the invocation name is CNN. Tell it to do weather.com. The invocation name is weather, right? Next is the intent. The intent is what would you like the skill to do? you have to define that now next, right? You want to say, Alexa, tell me the weather in blah, whatever this is. Now here I'm going to tell you what these things individually mean, but that's the intent of what you want the skill to do. And utterance is a sample of how that is going to sound like. So in this case, I'm going to say, build me a cluster. Tell me the weather. That kind of stuff is what the utterance actually means. And the execution itself is all handled by Lambda. So we'll cover that in a couple minutes. There's another couple things that you need to know, right? So out of the box, by default, you have a couple of out of the box things that you have. So number one is a launch request. So what is a launch request? Launch request is invoked at the start of the skill. So what typically you can do is you can say, as part of my launch request, I can put a welcome message, right? That's typically what you would do. If I need to do an intent request, that's basically all the subsequent activities that you will do as part of that skill that you're building. And then you can also add helpers, right? What are helpers? Helpers are basically to say, hey, if I go and say, I give it an utterance that it doesn't make sense, I can add helpers. And I can say, hey, if I hear a sentence that doesn't make sense, I want you to go and say this, right? So these are like fallback. Think of almost like helpers are like fallback mechanisms that you can kind of use, right? A very, very good one that I found that you can use to get started is the Alexa fact skill. So that is one of the most basic ones that you'll find out there. Take a look at it. Even if you have a couple hours over the weekend, give it a try. It is one of the best things that is out there that you can kind of use to get started with this whole thing. So where does Lambda kind of fit into this equation that we kind of talked about, right? So when we look at this, the way it actually works is you will take in the Lambda page, Alexa skills is kind of one of your trigger endpoints, right? So the way what we're doing is we're going to take the skills kit to trigger a Lambda execution, right? Every time it's going to basically start matching and saying, hey, I need to go and execute something. Lambda is the executor of whatever I need to go and do at the end of the day. The code itself that I'm going to show you in a couple minutes leverages the Ask SDK package, right, in Node. What it does beautifully is the fact that it is kind of scripted out all the stuff you need. So it'll make sense when I show you the actual code, but that's kind of already built out for you. So the same way you're leveraging packages for other mechanisms, the Alexa Skills Kit already has something for you to use out of the box as well. Now, as far as calling APIs itself, there are many ways you can solve this problem, right? You can do it through something called request, something called HTTPS. All of these are built-in packages for Node.js. The same things apply for Python and so on and so forth, right? You can use all of them. Personally, I chose to use Axios. Axios I chose to use because it's extremely easy to use. I did not want to spend a lot of time debugging, so I basically used Axios. It was extremely easy to use. It has great documentation, so feel free to use if you choose to, right? And I'll show you what all of these things end up meaning in the actual code section when we go look at it. Now, if you want to go and look at this in more detail, I have a blog up there which has been written by one of my buddies. Feel free to go look at that, and it'll give you an idea of how to call external APIs. Even if you're not building a Kubernetes cluster, it'll tell you how to go and make API calls to external endpoints, right? So, everyone want to see what this actually looks like? Yeah, okay. Yay! I'm only up to like 2 hashtags till now. So, if you want to look at this really, really quickly, I'm going to show you a fast version of this, and you can see what's going on. It's going to do this really, really fast. I'm going to create all the skills, and everything is going to work. I'm going to create an endpoint. If you can catch all of that, great. But if not, I'm going to show you how this looks in a couple minutes, right? So anyway, so that's the fast version of this. So now let's look at the actual slow version of how this is actually going to look like, right? So what I'm showing you here is the, let me actually blow this up a little bit. Can everyone see the screen? Good, looks good. So what I'm showing you here is actually the console for the VMware Cloud PKS Kubernetes engine. So right now, as of when I'm starting it, I only have one cluster that is actually running. So I don't have anything else that is running. If you're interested in learning more about the Kubernetes offering here, we're happy to chat after we're done here. But just to get you started, this is kind of the console. Obviously nothing exists on day one, right? So when I get started, the first place I'm going to go is the developer portal that I kind of told you about, right? So you go in there and you basically will go and look at the, and obviously you need the Amazon Management Console, the Amazon console as well. So if I go into the skills portion of it, what I'm going to do there is I'm going to go and click on create skill. Now I have the option of, like I was telling you earlier, so I can pick up one of the skills that are noted on the right side, or I can do a custom skill, and I'm just going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it VKE in this case, right? And that is what is going to be my invocation name as well, that I'm going to go and call. Again, if I want to do this, like I told you about the fact skill a couple minutes ago, you can use the fact skill to get started, or you can do it from scratch. I'm going to do it from scratch because I'm not going to leverage the thing that is in there, right? So first up, if I go click on the invocation name, it's going to take the invocation name that I gave it, right, as part of the skill. So next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the intents portion. This is where I'm going to start creating the intent. Now, as you can tell, there are some intents built in. So you can obviously modify some of them, but you also have intents that are already built in for you. So you can do a fallback intent, cancel intent, whatever you want to do. If it matches that, you can execute an action based on that. So now I'm going to do a add intent, and I'm going to do a custom intent because this is obviously custom to what I'm creating, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to do something called VKE build intent. Now a quick tip here from speaking to my buddies over at Amazon, they tell me use small names for invocation names. Don't use extremely large things, don't use underscores, don't make it very complicated. Just use simple names that you can call out. Same for the custom, the intent names as well. Use something that is simple, easy to understand, so that if you're going to publish this somewhere, people can actually know what you're writing about, right? Now, once I've done that, I'm going to put in something called an utterance. If you remember what the utterance was, these are what the user is going to say. I'm going to say, build me a VKE cluster, build cluster. It's going to match on any of these utterances. It's going to go and execute a certain number of functions. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do something called a slot. So what is a slot? Just quick, I'm going to breeze through this, but chat with me after, or we can obviously know about this in more detail. But a slot is essentially a way for you to say, hey, I want to pick up something from the user, right? A variable kind of a thing that I want to pick up from the user session. Like if I'm going to say, I need a cluster, and if I'm going to say, build me a cluster, I need the thing to kind of tell me, hey, what name do you want, right? If I'm going to give it a name and I'm going to say, call it Jon Snow, because I'm watching Game of Thrones, obviously, I'm going to call it Jon Snow, it's going to go and create something called Jon Snow. How do you pick up the fact that it's called Jon Snow? It's going to take that from the session, and the way it's going to take that is through what we call a slot, right? So that's what I'm going to create here. I'm going to create an answer slot, and I'm also going to kind of create slot values. So again, I'm going to start creating slot values. Here I'm just trying to keep it really simple, so I'm going to kind of pre-code whatever the values of the slot values are. There are ways to actually pick up a variable and store it as well, but just to show you how to build on a slot, I'm going to go and call it, the cluster names can be Arya, Ned Stark, Jon Snow, whatever, right? So I'm going to create names that kind of go match, or give it variable names that will match, and basically based on that, I'm going to take that name and go and build a cluster at the end of the day, right? So that's what I've done here. So I'm going to take that slot, and I'm going to create something called an answer intent, right? When it matches that answer intent, that's when it's going to actually go and create the cluster. So that's how it's going to go and match up with this whole thing, right? So when you create that intent, I'm going to go and say the utterance is actually going to match a value in the slot, right? Instead of it being a fixed user string, or it's going to be a string of characters, it's going to be a variable based on whatever that slot is going to come back. So hopefully that makes sense, right? So once I've done all of that, I'm going to go into the endpoint. What it does with the endpoint is now I'm going to go copy the endpoint that I've created here. This effectively is the skill ID that I need. I'm going to take that, I'm going to go into Lambda now, right? So this is our favorite Lambda console. I'm going to call this function, I'm going to call it VKE at this point. I think I call it VKE Lambda. Obviously I'm going to select Node.js, and I'm going to leverage a existing role. Obviously I've created this thing already. I've created Lambda functions in the past. So I'm going to take an existing role, and here is where I'm going to leverage the Alexa skill that I've created as a trigger for this Lambda endpoint, right? So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to paste that skill ID, and and say this is where I need to go. This is the skill ID this needs to kind of map to, right? At the end of the day. I'm going to also next, I'm going to take the ARN for the Lambda function itself. I'm going to take that and go back to my skill and paste it in there as the endpoint for the Lambda function. So this is how I'm created the tie-in between the Lambda skill and the Lambda function itself, right? So once I've done kind of all that, there's one more step that is remaining here, is to actually build the model. So if I go back to my skill, that's the one step that's remaining. So note, every time you make a change in an utterance, you add an intent, you add anything basically to the skills kit, go and build the skill, rebuild the skill, right? Here I'm going to go ahead and upload the zip file for what I basically need. So here I'm going to basically zip up my index.js file and the node modules that are corresponding to that, upload it, and next I'm going to create a test event. What is a test event? Test event is nothing but basically a way for you to see if the skill is actually going to start, or if there's any issues that you're going to see. So whatever issues you need, if there are any issues, you'll see all of that in CloudWatch. But this is a good way to test and make sure that your skill is actually at least starting off, and it's going to hit that launch request that you created, right? So again, now I can see if I go into CloudWatch, I can see that the skill actually triggered, it hit the launch request, and it actually goes forward, right? So this is a good way to actually just test out, make sure your Lambda functions are actually going. Usually you'll find a lot of errors. If you find errors, it'll tell you what is going on. So obviously, given there's a lot of noise here, so I ended up deciding to actually do the manual version of this, and there's a test button in the skills development kit itself. Go and enable the skill, and I'm going to go and say open VKE. This could be also voice driven, but I'm going to just show it to you so that you can see it. So it says, hey, welcome to the code session, what can I help you with? That's the interaction, right? I'm going to say, go and build me a VKE cluster. It's going to tell me, hey, I can do this. What kind of cluster, what would you like me to call this cluster, right? I'm going to go and say, go and call this Aria, for example. It's going to tell me, hey, your cluster is being built, go and look at the VKE console. Now if I flip back to the Cloud PKS console, I go and hit refresh on this guy, it's going to basically, now you'll see that the cluster obviously comes up. So I've kind of showed you the overarching thing of like, hey, how does this actually look, and how do you kind of get through this, right? So now, just want to give you a quick peek at the code itself so that you get a sense of how this has been built. So I've basically done a couple things. So number one is, as the cluster, I've built a couple of messages that are like static entries. So every time I go and hit the launch request, it's going to tell me, welcome to the skill session, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go and go do this. Now, if I need to do the initiation of starting the skill itself, it's going to say, yeah, I can do this. What would you like me to call it? So on and so forth. The launch request handlers and so on and so forth are already built in the node package that I mentioned to you, right? So that's part of the SDK that Amazon provides for you. So you can actually kind of just plug and play and you're ready to go right off there. So basically, if you look at the way I've done it now is, if it matches this intent request handler that I told you about, right? And it matches this VKE build intent, it's going to go ahead and build out a couple things. It's going to run a couple of functions based on that. If it matches the answer intent, it's going to go and do certain things. So ultimately, if you think about it, if you boil everything down and say, hey, where is the actual magic happening, and how is it, which is the place where it's actually making the call? It's this function that is down here. This post command that is down here is basically what I'm passing down into as part of that API call. And what I'm passing is the answer slot variable. If you look at it here, that's the variable that I picked up. So if I can say, hey, this is called Jon Snow or Arya or Ned Stark, whatever, that is the slot that it's picking up, and that's what it's using as the name and display name. Now, obviously, you can expand this into making it extremely robust, where I can say, hey, what folder do you want this to go into? What project does this need to be part of? Pretty much, you can put a variable for every single item that you see in the API header, and you can go to town on this at the end of the day. So, and then that's part of the speech, and at the end, I have a speech output thing here that says, your thing is being built, and this is what you're going to see at the end of this, right? So that's pretty much what the code is, right? So the code itself is actually pretty straightforward. All you have to really do is match the intents, match the, make sure you get the right API call, pass the right headers, pass the right authorization key, and that's about it. So with that, I know we have about 5 or 7 minutes, so thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming by. Hopefully this was useful. I'll be around. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to come by. Thank you. Hashtag BCS.
Nice job, man. That was great. You may or may not have misspelled Aria, just so you know.
Oh, that